Hello, this video is the history of Africa. I did a recorded history videos a couple months ago, and I kind of remembered after I did it that I kind of skipped over Africa. I forgot to talk about Africa. I don't really have a whole lot to talk about Africa. Unfortunately, Africa doesn't have a whole lot of information about the history, and it should. I think black filmmakers should make more movies about ancient Africa. Like, there were lots of good civilizations and kingdoms and stuff in Africa that went on for a long time, and that were big, had cities and stuff, and just make a story about that. You know, that's just like a peaceful, happy. You had Timbuktu. That was right on the edge of I think on the edge of Lake Chad. You know, beautiful setting. People living around Lake Victoria. And there's lots of different kinds of people it's an interesting place. Lots of different kinds of people living around Lake Victoria. You got the little like 3-foot tall pygmies living near there. And then right on the other side in the Sudan, the Dinka, the like 7-foot Dinka. And then, you know, just north of that, the Ethiopians, like the black people who like white features, but they have black skin. Now, I did see some of the lost tribes of Israel, so I could start about that. Well, maybe I'll get to that later. I'll start really early in African history. Well, the original African human beings come from this valley called Leakey Valley? Anyway, it's where the archaeologists the Leakey family were doing their thing. I can't remember the name of the valley, but it's in the southeastern part of Africa, like in modern day, like south of Lake Victoria-ish, kind of between Lake Victoria and South Africa there. And it's this big valley, and that's where they find all of the bones of like Lucy. They found Lucy, a 4.5 million year old like Cro-Magnon girl who's like 4.5 feet tall or something. And so that's where like the original humans come from. And they have done like DNA projects and stuff to find that kind of stuff out, but I haven't seen any really good videos about it. There's one that it's like a big series of some scientists who did it, but he didn't do a really good job. He didn't focus much on the science or explaining the science. All he did was visit some African tribe that was supposed to be the most related to the original humans based on their DNA, but he didn't describe how. But anyways, that's how it's supposed to be like. And it makes sense because, well, monkeys are there and humans came from monkeys, and African monkeys are in Africa. And then people, moved out from there. And some of the oldest evidence of civilization is from Egypt, from 3300 BC. That's tied, actually, exactly tied, with the oldest evidence of the lineage of the kingdoms in the Indus Valley, which is in Pakistan, which is an extinct river, and Mesopotamia. They're all about 3300 BC. And that's also when the Mayan calendar starts, 3315 BC. Mm-hmm. So, but there's also evidence of there's this stories that certain psychics made. I think about how about like 200,000 years ago, aliens came down and mixed. And I think that's about how old Homo sapiens is supposed to be, about 200,000 years old, where they mixed Homo erectus with the aliens to create Homo sapien. And Homo erectus coexisted with Homo sapien at the same time, who also coexisted with Neanderthal, who is similar to Homo sapien. Neanderthal lived until about 30,000 years ago. Neanderthal had larger brains than us. We have about 1,500 cc's, and Neanderthals had like 1,700 cc's, and the Neanderthals were a little bit shorter, but they were like a lot bigger. So they were pretty intelligent, the Neanderthals. But the Homo erectus was more like Monkey Boy. The ones with the big brows and stuff. Neanderthals had big brows too, but these guys, Monkey Boy, Homo erectus was just like more Monkey Boy and shorter and stuff. Yeah, they were supposed to start about 200,000 years ago, but they found evidence, 200,000-year-old gigantic gold mines in South Africa that are that old. And so they're thinking maybe it was the aliens who created humans from back then. And then fast forward, I think some of the earliest people who they discovered the Iron Age were people from like Congo-ish area of Africa, before any of the Europeans. Yeah, they're doing the iron, which makes sense because there's lots of trees and stuff that they could have burnt and found out how to make that, But Yeah, it's interesting how there's lots of different races in Africa that look totally different from each other. You have the gorilla-looking people who are totally black, and then the whitish Ethiopians, the little tiny little pygmies, and the gigantic Dinka and Watutsis, and yeah, I guess it's just like, well, maybe because they were just so isolated from each other because they were primitive and living in different, and there's lots of different environs there. There's the savannah and the jungle and the desert and stuff. So people would just be accustomed to one area and they just stay there, and they just stay there because they look different, and they just stay put. And that's just how they were, because their life was easy that way. Life in Africa was easy because there's plenty of animals to hunt and plenty of fruits to grab, and it's not like constant competition for land and migration, riding on horses across the savannah in the north, moving into each other's territory all the time, and starving from too hard of a winter, so going in somewhere else. So maybe that's why they all look so different. But but then you fast forward, and then you have let's go up to past Egypt. Well, I guess I could talk about Egypt a little bit because that's Africa. Egypt, started about 3300 BC, and you have all these different dynasties, the first all the way up to the 29th dynasty, and then even up to the Ptolemaic dynasties, which is up until Cleopatra at 44 BC, when they got taken over by Augustus Caesar, and that was the end of independent Egypt. But until then, all those different dynasties, a lot of those dynasties coexisted because you had the Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. Upper Egypt was like modern day Sudan, and then Lower Egypt would have been like at Giza. And Upper Egypt was very advanced as well. They had the same religion, the same gods, same hieroglyphics, same country. Although a lot of the people in Upper Egypt were black. And a lot of black people like to say, oh, the Egyptians were black. And they are actually telling the truth. They were white and they were black. I think ancient Egypt was a mixture of different races. Ramses was a blonde-haired dude. And some people go, oh, but he wasn't blonde. They just put they rubbed ash into his head, which bleached him blonde. But I don't believe that. I think he actually was a white person, or at least maybe a Middle Eastern looking guy with red hair, because I think that's his natural hair color, because he wasn't the only mummy who looked like that. And if you look at his bone structure, it looks like a white man's bone structure. And if you look at the statues of him, he looks like a white dude. And it's they're on the southern end of Mediterranean, just like a day's journey flowing south from Greece, where they're all white. So there was lots of trade, and I think they looked part white, part black. And of course, it's on Africa, so there are lots of black people coming up. So that's why those people are kind of like dark skinned. It's just part black, part white, and it's been like that forever. But I think there were pharaohs who were white and some pharaohs who were black. One of the pharaohs was one of the female pharaohs. What was it? Hatshepsut, one of the earlier pharaohs. I saw a statue of her, and it's a black statue of black marble, and it looks pretty clear to me as a black woman, with the features of a black woman, like round face, big forehead with the hair starting far back in the forehead, nose like that, big thick nose, big lips, cheeks like that. Looked like a black lady, and it had black skin. Looked just like a black lady, and she was one of the pharaohs. And that was in Upper Egypt, the Sudan area. And I think some black Africans even went to America because the Olmec heads were of black people. They looked black to me. And I think that they could have been black people who just got on boats and went down there. But, maybe a black American filmmaker could make a movie about that. But you had all these different dynasties going along at the same time in the south and northern Egypt. And so Egypt lasted a long time and constantly, getting in wars and stuff with the Hittites and stuff. And then about 3,000 years ago, I think it was 1100 BC is when it was actually after that. It was 560 BC ish, or 720 BC. 720 BC was when the kingdom of Israel fell. And then 560 BC is when the kingdom of Judah fell to the Babylonians. And I think it was one of those, maybe in 720 when Israel fell. The second Israel, the one after Solomon. Because there was one before Solomon. The Ark of the Covenant disappeared, and then the 12 tribes of Judah, dispersed. They, ran off. And so, a lot of Jews in China say, we're Jew. And I would say, yeah, sure, they are. If they say they are, then they are. And they have the Jewish tradition, then of course they are. And they have ones in India, we're Jew. It's cool that they're all popping up. But ones in in Ethiopia also, Axum, they claim to have the Ark of the Covenant, and I believe that. And then there's even some Jews in South Africa, and they're blacks. They look totally black, but they do all the Jewish rites and rituals. I saw this in a YouTube video, and they call themselves Jew, and they have the story from when they left Israel and all that stuff. And it's kind of appalling to me how that's not common knowledge. You know, it's like racist that people don't just believe that. Like, oh, cool, wow, we found the last tribes. Look, we found the Ark of the Covenant. We found it because they say they are. They're just like, yeah, those stupid black people saying stories, you know, even though it's like a whole freaking religion and town of black people down there, you know, who are saying that. It's kind of like, you know, in the days, we're not like that anymore, but like 50 years ago, people would do archaeology about the Indians and stories about the Indians and be like, oh yes, and the Indians did this, and they're never even bothering to ask the Indians, you know. Because a lot of the Hopis, they're like, yeah, the Hopi prophecy, the Hopis, we were part of the Mayans, and we were part of the Aztecs and the Atlantis and all this stuff, and they have all those stories, but nobody wants to listen to them, you know, because they just think they're stupid Indians. But yeah, I believe that. I believe that those black people. So why are they black then? Well, I'm sure that they were white back then, but then they come back to Africa, and they mix with black people. And I guess Judaism, when it came down, maybe it was a patrilineal religion, so that they would marry a lot, but you know, just because like your father was religion, they would convert to the Judaism, and because like the father was. So now they're more black than white. But even if they do have a lot of white in them, if they're in that environment for 3,000 years, and you know, in the heat, all like that, their skin turns black and they just look black. There's lots of people who have a lot of blood type of another race, and they don't look that race. I saw a little news show about a couple. And like they were a mixed race couple. I think they were both a mixed race couple. They were both mulattoes. You know, mother and father were kind of like part black, part white or whatever. And they had twins, 2 twin girls. And one of the girls was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white girl, and the other twin was a black girl. Yeah, I saw them. It was crazy. And also like my ex-wife, she's a dark-skinned Latina girl. Like dark skin, dark hair, everything, thick hair. Indian-looking girl, and she had a daughter who's a blue-eyed, blonde-haired white girl, totally white, 100% white. You wouldn't see a trace. She's only like 3.5 years old now, but you wouldn't see a trace of an ethnic in her at all. And so it goes both ways. And I think that's why the Ethiopians have like the whites features, because they have the stories of being Jews as well. And I think they were just white people who went down there, and then they mixed, you know, over 3,000 years. Now they kind of look like their own race. And like if we were to have Armageddon all of a sudden, and America would be severed off from Europe for 3,000 years, and then we suddenly meet with the Americans and the English, even though we have the same ancestry from 3,000 years in the past, we'd be different races. We'd be a lot darker skinned, because it's always overcast in England. We would be, you know, we'd have more, you know, Native American blood in us because of all the Mexicans who live here now, and black, you know, we'd be a different race. We'd create our own race. And that's kind of how it was in the past. You could tell from where somebody was, from what tribe they were, even just by what they looked like. There's all these different kinds of different looking people, and probably because they did a lot of interbreeding as well, you'd have these people and they'd all look the same, kind of like one big family. They all look the same. And then on the other side of the mountains, these other people, and they look totally different, but they all look the same. So one of them could cross over and you'd all automatically know. You wouldn't have to open their mouth. You just look at them and you know that they're from a tribe of just like a few square kilometers, kind of like the same size as modern day England has all the different accents in England. Well, imagine the amount of area that those accents take. And then that's like actually not just an accent, but an actual ethnic group that you can look at and they look different, you know, lots of different kinds of white people. And that's, I think, how Europe used to be a long time ago, and how Africa actually still is now with all the different races they have down there. But anyways, Africa historically over the years has had lots of different kingdoms, just like in Europe, taking over about the same amount of space. And they do remember their kingdoms. They may not have had like written language, but they do remember their kingdoms, and they have the king lists. And it's different in Africa than in Europe, because in Europe, dynasties didn't really last that long. You'd have like a really long dynasty. I guess the Romanovs in Russia were the longest lasting dynasty for like 300 years. And then maybe some other dynasties lasted maybe 200 years or something, or 100 years. But normally dynasties didn't really last that long in Europe. And there was I think the longest lasting dynasty in Asia would have been the Ming, the ones who fell in World War One. They were like 300 years old, and they were the longest ones ever. So, but in Africa, you look at the king list of African, lots of different of these African countries from the past kingdoms, and it would be, this guy passed it on to his son, this guy passed on to his son, and it was like the same dynasty for like 1,000 years. And it was like no usurpations, and it led me to believe, and it wasn't just one kingdom, it was lots of them. It led me to believe that they were more peaceful people. I know a lot of black people like to claim that it's the white man who's not the peaceful people and they're the warlike ones, even though a lot of white people in America look at black people as they're the warlike people because of all the gang warfare and stuff. But I think that's mainly just a result of them being poor. Poor people are more violent. But and then also people say, oh yeah, the testosterone. They have more testosterone, so they fight more in jail. But anyways, maybe even those black people saying that white people are more violent are onto something, and that maybe they were more peaceful, and they would just be able to have a lot of these dynasties that could last like 1,000 years and stuff. But maybe it was just them being just guessing because they didn't have a written language and just be like, yeah, them and that. But because I think it kind of seems like in Hawaii it was the same way. But they had lots of different kingdoms out there, a whole bunch of them. And Africa is really Muslim as well. Islam is a huge religion, and it's a big religion for Africa. It's not just Middle East. Islam created the Islamic Muslim, or the Muslims and the followers of and descendants of Muhammad, created the Islamic Empire that stretched all the way from the southern half of Spain all the way to like Iraq or Iran. But the religion with caliphs and having caliphates and sultanates with Muslim leaders went all the way to Indonesia and India and all over Indonesia, but also Africa, all over Africa, mainly the western side of Africa, and even like the middle of Africa in the south. There were lots of these Muslim kingdoms that lasted all the way up into the present time. And they even have, even though they're incorporated into his country, they still have the leader, who's kind of still like the head of his like town or whatever. But same thing in Asia, in Indonesia. But they were very Muslim back then, and yeah, there are a lot of them. And Jew, so Muslim, Jew, and Christian. So I guess the eastern side of Africa was involved in a lot of the slave trade, and so the slave traders, the original people who started with the English, and they would get the other, or I think it was English and Spanish, they did slave trading too, but they would get some of the Africans to help them and kidnap other Africans, and they set up, I think that's how a lot of those countries are actually originally set up, countries that exist today, and kingdoms actually. There was one kingdom that was a slave trading kingdom. It was started as a slave trading kingdom, and that's what it was. And it had the capital city was a big fortress that was the slave trading fortress. I think it was the modern day Senegal, and that was a big lucrative big business for a long time, starting in like the 1500s, slave trading to America. And yeah, black people would capture other black people and help English people go there and slave trade and bring him. And I think they deliberately brought the biggest of the Africans. And maybe that's why Africans in America are really big. But then the English outlawed it back in like the 1600s or something. But Americans kept it legal because we were like addicted to it, like how smokers are addicted to cigarettes. We were addicted to it. Yeah. But then like modern day Africa is like really problematic since World War II. Most of the wars that have been going on in Europe or in the world have been in Africa. There's always a war. I'm sure there's a war right now going on in Africa. Like every single country in Africa has been in a big war in the last few years. And now a lot of Africans like to complain that it's because American and like European colonialism went there, and it's their fault because they like subjected them to their rule and and then would put the wrong people in power. And I know they did. Like they put that guy Mugabe in power from that country, Uganda, was it? And the English put him in power back in like the 70s just because they thought that he was a crony, because he was in the English army. And he was really charming and he was really nice to the English. They're like, oh, cool, Mugabe. Yeah, we like you. You'll do what we tell you. Because then he was the 7-time heavyweight boxing champion of Uganda. And he was illiterate. And they just put him in power and he freaking caused hell. He did genocide of entire towns. They made that movie, The Last King of Scotland, starring Forrest Whitaker, was about him. And he's still alive and like living in like Oman or something. But that's what happens when you get, I think that's what they're talking about. And there's definitely something to it. You get all these colonial company and then countries down there, and then you get like corrupt European politicians or American politicians getting illiterate people in there in power just because you think they're going to be a crony. Obviously, they're going to be corrupt and kill people, and it's not because, I mean, he'd do crazy stuff. He'd like, I think he cut off his wife's head and gave it to like his other wife in like an ice box or something, and he like murdered his family members and just totally insane dude. And anyways, it's not because they're like stupid black monkey people. A lot of like white supremacists like to say that, oh, those black people, look at all the wars. It's because they're stupid black monkey people. They're not. And maybe even black people might even be duped into thinking that. But I do think when black people say that it's white pants' fault, there's definitely something to that. And that when people are, and also, you know, poor countries in like North, South America and like Caribbean and stuff, when black people are subjected and they're like slaves and they're not allowed to think or talk or take any self-responsibility for themselves, and then all of a sudden you just kind of dump them there, they're not going to like, and there's nobody educated in the whole place to steer the boat. You can't expect them to like all of a sudden have a well-running country, especially when there's not educated people. And when the educated people do go to like the first world to get education, they just stay in the first world because they don't want to go back to their country because it's too poor. So there's like no educated people. There's nobody who knows how to operate the machines. Like there are countries, what was it, Tanzania, that was like half white, and then they allowed free elections, whatever. So then like they voted in some like communist dude who annexed all of the private holdings of the white farmers. And then they went in there and they would like rape the white farmers, you know, wives and kill them and took over. And so they like all the white people ran off, like war refugees back to Europe, and left the black people there. And then the black people there, but they didn't know how to work all the farming equipment. They didn't know how to toil the land. Because they didn't have the education. They just thought that it was like easy, anybody could do it. And then so their country went downhill. And yeah, so it's not really, and I'm sure they, you know, those black people were just pissed off and they're being like, white man been abusing us, so now we're going to take the power back. And they kind of forgot that even though they were white, they were still their countrymen, and they still should have respected them, you know, and our country would have been better off for it. But to say that that's like, goddamn black people do that, well, white people do the same thing against black people, perpetrated more crimes against black people, like with slavery and, you know, not, hell, stringing black people up just because they're black. You know, we still do that. Dragging the dude behind the car until his head comes off, and you know, like that happened like 5 years ago in Alabama or something. So, yeah, just to say, oh, stupid black people, it's because they're black. No, I wouldn't go that far. I would say it's because they have to adjust into learning how to, you know, run a company or a country in a autonomous way from people who are educated. And I think people who get educated in the first world are starting to move back to Africa and have some pride in their own country, and bring the country back. So, but in the past, I think they were just as smart and they're more peaceful, but they just didn't invent the stuff because they didn't live in harsh climate. That's just how it is, you know. Animals, and I'm going to just make the comparison. I'm not saying that white people's brains are smarter, but animals' brains get smarter when they have to start thinking. Like predatory animals, cats, are 1,000,000 times smarter than bunnies, because bunnies just run around and, nibble on stuff, but cats have to strategize, and it's the same thing with Europe. You always had to strategize with crops, with getting ahead of the seasons, and then migrating and defending migrators and destroying people who you invade, and wars and battles and all this stuff, and then inventing things. Just created a society. I would say a more intelligent society. I'm not saying people, but meanwhile, black people are just kind of hanging around with their thumbs up their asses, living the easy life, picking bananas out of the tree, you know. But they had, I mean, it's not like they wasted their brain. I'm not saying that. They used their brain for different things. They used their brain for like making those songs, the pygmy songs. Amazing, man. Sounds amazing. And then the dances that they do, and bungee jumping, and with vines, and then the power of memorization, because they didn't have a written language. I mean, they could remember every single king's name for the last 1,000 years, and the wars that happened and all that stuff. It was all by word of mouth. Now, maybe some of them had like some basic alphabet. I'd like to know if they did, but it wasn't. I don't think it was anything along the lines of Latin script or anything. But yeah. But anyways, yeah. I don't think that white people are genetically more advanced, more intelligent than black people. I think they can. Black people, once they figure out, in the next 50 years to do their thing back in Africa, they're going to be just fine as just like Americans. But I do think that there are some genetic traits with personality and brain, the way your brain works, that goes beyond skin deep. I said in another video, like, where the different human races came from. The black people liked to rhyme, and all these people are like, hey, idiot, black people like to rhyme. What a fucking racist asshole. But like, black people do like to rhyme. Just listen to black music. It's all about rhyming, and compare that with the kind of people who don't have a written language. They rhyme. That's how Homer told his stories, by rhyming, because it helps you remember. And I think that's actually, and then they dance. I mean, look at how they dance. They do the dance, what's it called, the freako or whatever, where they're like, well, like black kids in America do that, but they never saw the black dudes. I even saw like the documentary. They never saw the black people in Africa do that. And then they go, oh wait, the Africans are doing it too. It's like in their blood. And so, yeah. And so anyways, I don't want to come across racist, but yeah, I think that there are differences. But I think overall, intelligence and ability to like think strategically and do this and do that and be responsible and have a successful society, and blacks are going to be just as fine as whites in the future. It's just that they had some bumps to jump over after being suddenly given their reins, after being slaves for so long in Africa, under colonialism. Yeah, that's about all I have to say about Africa. My timeline's going to have all of the different kingdoms. Africa's a really large continent, and there are lots of different kingdoms there. just as many as about the same size as the kingdoms were as the ones in Europe. So there are more kingdoms in Africa than Europe. I mean, yeah, all over Africa. So it's pretty interesting because people don't pay attention to that kind of stuff, and I think there's a lot of scholarly activity to be done, and movies, cool, interesting movies to be made about it. So anyways, history of Africa.